the cessation of the chain of hatred and revenge, the power of compassion and forgiveness. Once upon a time, in the fertile land of ancient India, a scripture was born, holding profound lessons and eternal truths. This story weaves together the destinies of King Choju, his son Prince Chosho, and their archenemy, King Banyo. It is a tale of hatred and revenge, compassion and forgiveness, and the profound transformation of the human heart. Through the ages, it continues to impart many lessons to us even now. Now let us embark together on this timeless story's journey. Long ago, in the kingdom of Kosala in central India, there was a king named Choju, and his crown prince was called Chosho. King Choju was exceptionally compassionate and always delighted in giving alms, so the people revered his virtue and had not the slightest anxiety. Moreover, as if the heavens were moved by this, the wind and rain followed the seasons, and as if the earth rejoiced in it, the 5 grains ripened abundantly. Because of this, all the people spent their days in happiness, and the kingdom prospered more and more. In contrast, in the neighboring kingdom of Varanasi, King Banyo was tyrannical, so the country was in ruins and the people were impoverished. Therefore, he constantly envied the prosperity of King Choju's kingdom. One time, King Banyo summoned his close vassals and said,
"According to what I hear, although King Choju's country is wealthy, they have very little military preparation. I am thinking of invading King Choju's country from now on. What do you think?"
He consulted with them. The close vassals also agreed to this, and the king himself immediately led a large army to attack the kingdom of Kosala. The people of Kosala living near the border heard of this and were greatly surprised. They promptly reported to the king and wished for troops to be sent to the border as soon as possible. Then the ministers immediately began preparations for war. However, the deeply benevolent and merciful King Choju gathered many ministers and declared,
"I will not engage in war. I intend to entrust my country, my people, and all my treasures to King Banyo. Because if we fight with King Banyo in order not to hand over these things, the innocent people will die or be injured because of it. The land will be laid waste, and the treasures will be burned to no avail. For my sake, I cannot bring the calamities of war upon this country and these people. For the sake of my beloved people and country, I will offer no resistance to King Banyo,"
he declared. However, the ministers unanimously urged,
"Please do not be so faint-hearted, but send out troops. We have sufficient knowledge concerning warfare. We are confident that we can crush the enemy troops without harming the people of our country. They do not know our capabilities. Please take this opportunity to show them our strength. We will surely be victorious for you to see."
King Choju said again,
"Even if our country wins, there will be casualties among their troops. The people of our country and the soldiers of their country both equally cherish their lives. Loving only oneself and harming others is not the path that the wise should take."
However, the hot-blooded ministers did not listen to the king's words. They left the king alone in the palace, organized a large army themselves, and led it toward the border. In other words, they launched an attack from their side. Left behind, King Choju thought of the horrors of war and was inconsolable with worry. He pondered in various ways how he could stop this battle. And after much thought, he concluded that there was no other way than to abdicate the throne and go into hiding. So he persuaded Prince Chosho, saying,
"The ministers went to battle without heeding my words. If there is war, there will surely be casualties. This is because everyone is fighting for the two of us. If we leave this country, the war will naturally cease. For the sake of many people, let us abandon this country and hide in the mountains."
The prince followed his father's words, and together with his father, they disguised themselves, slipped out of the palace under the cover of night, and hid themselves in a certain mountain. The news that the king had left the country eventually reached the battlefield. The ministers fighting for the king also lost heart in the battle without the king, and the battle naturally ceased. King Banyo finally came to rule King Choju's country. Having seized the country, King Banyo was uneasy as long as King Choju was alive.
Whoever brings me the head of King Choju will be given a large sum of money.
He issued this proclamation throughout the country. One day, as King Choju, who was hiding in the mountains, was resting in the shade of a tree by the roadside, an old, shabby-looking traveling Brahmin happened to pass by and sat down under the same tree. The two, sitting side by side in the shade of one tree, began to talk to each other. King Choju, while taking pity on the old Brahmin tired from his journey, asked kindly,
"Where have you come from? Why have you come to this country? I am from this country, but I happen to be in these mountains. Where have you come from, and where are you going from here?"
he inquired kindly. The Brahmin replied,
I am a poor monk from a distant country. Hearing that King Choju of this country was giving alms, I came from afar to meet the king, receive alms, and escape my poor living conditions. I wish to sustain what little life I have left. Is the king still giving alms even now? It is fortunate for me to have met someone from this country here. Please tell me about the state of your country.
He spoke eagerly with both hope and anxiety. Hearing this, King Choju fell silent and pondered for a while. What a pitiful man. He came from afar relying on me, but as I am now, I have nothing to give him in return. At a loss as to what to do, he shed tears and said to the Brahmin,
I am the King Choju you are looking for. I was once the king of this country, but my country was seized by thieking of another country. And now I am merely a refugee hiding in these mountains. As you can see, I now have nothing. Hearing that you came all the way from a distant country for my sake, it grieves me deeply that I have nothing now. What can I do to satisfy you?
He said. The king who spoke and the Brahmin who listened both shed tears, and eventually they took each other's hands and wept. After a while, the king wiped his tears and said with determination,
The current new king is seeking my head with a large sum of money at stake. Please cut off my head, take it with you, and receive the reward from the king. I will give you this head as alms.
Hearing this, the Brahmin was astonished and waved both hands, saying,
What an absurd thing to say. Even if you order me now to cut off your head, how could I possibly do that? I heard your name and thought to receive your favor, but I have no intention of cutting off your head to prolong my own life. It is my misfortune. My virtue is scant. Resigning myself to this, I will return the way I came.
Saying this, the Brahmin tried to leave. The king grasped the Brahmin's sleeve and said earnestly,
Human beings never know when they will die. Especially, I will soon be captured by someone's hand and killed before the new king. Before I am brutally killed at the hands of a stranger, please end my life with your own hands, and let this head of mine be of use to you. It is a life that will soon be found and killed. There is absolutely no need to hold back. Take this head and exchange it for money. I cannot possibly send you back empty-handed when you have come from afar to visit me. Please allow me to make this final act of almsgiving.
He persuaded. Having been told this much, the Brahmin could not leave, so he sat down again and said,
I understand your words well. Also, I am truly grateful for your intention. However, no matter what you say, I cannot cut off your head with my own hands.
He said, bowing his head deeply in thought. Then the king said,
Indeed, it would be unreasonable to have you cut off my head. Then let us do this. Tie me up alive and take me to the king.
He proposed. Having been told this much, the Brahmin could not refuse. So he reluctantly left the shade of the tree and headed together toward the royal palace. When they reached the castle gate, King Choju was bound by the Brahmin, and the two passed through the gate. The Brahmin went to the palace and announced that he had captured and brought King Choju. The king was overjoyed and immediately gave the Brahmin a large sum of money. He received it and slowly returned the way he had come. Now the captured King Choju was sentenced to be burned to death. and was eventually dragged out to the crossroads at the castle gate. Hearing of this, King Choju's former retainers petitioned the king, saying,
King Choju was once our lord. Unfortunately, he's now about to be executed. We will never beg for his life, but we wish to at least offer him a last meal as a farewell in this life. And we would like to be allowed to bury his remains. We sincerely hope that by your Majesty's mercy, you will grant us just this.
The king had no choice but to accept their request. King Choju's former retainers prepared an elaborate feast and presented it with tears to their former lord, who had been so compassionate. King Choju also gladly accepted their devotion. The residents of the castle who saw this mourned King Choju's death and cried out to the heavens his innocence. Their voices spread to the villages outside the castle and even further into the distant mountains. Hearing this, there was no one who did not grieve King Choju's death and shed tears. Meanwhile, Prince Chosho, who had come down from the mountains concerned about his father's safety, heard the rumor from a passerby and was shocked, nearly fainting. He went into the mountains, gathered firewood, carried it on his back, disguised himself as a woodcutter selling firewood, and snuck into the castle. He hurried to the crossroads where his father was being displayed, pushed through the crowd, and came out in front of his father. He saw his father's transformed appearance and thought of the merciless punishment about to be carried out. He felt as if his guts were boiling with grief and anger. King Choju saw Prince Chosho's state and thought he would surely take revenge for his sake. To stop this, he decided to leave his last words. Looking up at the sky, he spoke as if to himself, but loud enough for the prince to hear.
To obey one's parents' teachings is the foremost duty of a person. King Choju is not going to his death holding any resentment. He is going joyfully. If there is anyone who would take revenge for King Choju's sake, that person would be defiling this pure and joyful death with the blood of resentment. If one takes revenge, resentment will again breed resentment, and resentment will continue endlessly and eternally. Therefore, you must never kill anyone for my sake. These are my last words as King Choju.
Thus, King Choju was executed by being burned to death. Prince Chosho could not bear to see his father's merciless death before his eyes, so he ran from the place and fled back to the mountains. Eventually, King Choju's remains were buried with care by his former retainers. Having returned to the mountains, Prince Chosho agonized for several nights over whether he should follow his father's last noble words, or whether he should relieve his own unbearable feelings of resentment. And after much agonizing, he finally decided to go against his father's teachings and resolved to avenge his resentment.
My father was a saint. He entrusted his country to the king of another country without resistance, and furthermore gave his life without regret. And on the verge of death, he instructed me not to take revenge.
He was an incomparable saint.
However, King Banyo shows no sign of remorse, even after killing this saint. Father said to forgive this, but I cannot possibly forgive it. It is my mission to punish this tyrannical and unrighteous King Banyo on behalf of heaven. I will not fail to punish him by any means. If I do not kill him, my life in this world will have no meaning.
The young prince finally became this obsessed. So he descended the mountain, went out to the city, disguised himself as a lowly hired man, and single-mindedly sought an opportunity to get close to the king. He sought connections and took up residence as a gardener for a minister. The head gardener ordered him to sow vegetables. Then the vegetables grew exceptionally well. One day, the minister came to the garden, saw the vegetables the prince had sown, praised their excellent condition, called the head gardener, and asked who had grown them. Then the head gardener answered, saying,
"It was sown by a young man we hired recently."
The minister promptly called for the young man and met with him. At first glance, he took a liking to this wise youth. The minister thought it would be a waste to keep him as a mere garden worker.
Can you cook?
He asked. The prince promptly replied,
Cooking is my specialty.
He answered. The prince, who had gone out to the fields carrying a hoe, had never entered a kitchen and grasped a kitchen knife, but the skillful prince made delicious dishes here too and earned the minister's praise. One day this minister requested the king to visit his house. The king gladly went to the minister's house. There the minister entertained the king with his prized dishes. The food was so delicious that the king asked who had made it, and the minister replied that so-and-so had made it. The king took a great liking to this cook, and forcibly had the minister relinquish the prince to him, appointing him as the royal chef in the palace. Completely captivated by the prince's elegant bearing and quick-witted temperament, the king thought to make this youth his close attendant. And one day, turning to Prince Chosho, he said,
Have you ever learned swordsmanship?
The prince replied,
Yes, I have learned it.
He answered. The king ordered the prince to attend him constantly at his side as his close attendant. And he said privately,
I have an enemy. Prince Chosho, the child of King Choju, whom I killed some years ago, is after my life. He is a very fearsome enemy to me. But now, with a sturdy young man like you by my side, I can sleep with peace of mind.
Not knowing that the person currently before his eyes was Prince Chosho himself, he had entrusted his life to the very enemy.
As you wish. For your majesty's sake, I will always lay down my life to protect you.
Prince Chosho replied. Prince Chosho pitied King Banyo, who was at ease in trusting his life to his enemy, but he kept a straight face and nodded in agreement. Thus the king's trust in the prince grew deeper and deeper. The prince pitied the king, but he never forgot his resentment. He was waiting for an opportunity. One day, the king turned to Prince Chosho and said,
Do you like hunting?
The prince immediately replied.
I have loved hunting since I was a child.
The king promptly ordered preparations for a hunt. Guarded by many retainers and forming an imposing procession, the king and Prince Chosho set out from the palace. The party passed through the city, exited the castle gate, passed through villages, crossed fields, and finally reached the foot of the mountains. Eventually, the hunt began. The king and Prince Chosho found suitable prey, and while chasing it, they gradually entered deep into the mountains and ultimately lost their way. The two ran around the mountains for 3 days and 3 nights, but could not find the way out no matter what. Their stomachs were empty, their bodies were tired, and their spirits were waning. On the night of the 3rd day, when they could no longer go forward or backward, the two entered a nearby grove, dismounted from their horses, and sat down there. The king unbuckled his sword, entrusted it to Prince Chosho, and said,
I will rest, so please keep watch.
Saying this, he fell asleep beside the prince. This was the prince's plan to lure the king into this grove. The prince had been eagerly awaiting this opportunity.
I have been waiting for this opportunity for a long time. Now is the time to avenge my father.
He thought. The prince drew his sword, and the moment he was about to stab the king, his father's last words came to his mind. His noble father's teachings stayed his hand at this critical moment. He hurriedly sheathed his sword. At that moment, the king awoke and said,
Just now I was tormented by a nightmare. It was a dream that King Choju's son came to kill me. What could this mean?
He said. Prince Chosho feigned composure and replied,
It must be the demons living in these mountains playing tricks on your majesty. I am keeping watch, so please rest assured and sleep.
He replied. The king was tired, so he fell asleep again. Prince Chosho drew his sword once more and tried to kill the king, but again he remembered his father's last words and could not kill the king. He sheathed his sword again. Then the king awoke again and said, trembling with fear,
I had another dream of Prince Chosho trying to stab me. It's truly strange to have such a dream twice. What could this mean?
He said,
It must be the mischief of the demons dwelling in the mountains. There is absolutely nothing to fear.
Prince Chosho reassured the king. The king felt reassured and fell asleep again. Prince Chosho took this opportunity and mustered his courage to place his sword against the king's chest, but once again his father's last words strongly resurfaced in his mind, and he could not stab him. In the end, the prince's feelings of resentment were defeated by his father's noble spirit. He gave up on stabbing the king and threw his sword to the ground. At that moment, the king awoke from his dream and said,
Again, King Choju's child came to kill me. But in the dream, he threw down his sword and said he would not kill me. What could this mean?
Then the prince confessed everything before the king.
O king, I am none other than King Choju's son, Prince Chosho. I approached you to avenge my father's resentment. However, just before his death, my father left me with this firm last instruction: never take revenge for my sake. Revenge begets revenge, continuing eternally. Father now goes to his death joyfully for the sake of giving. He bears no resentment at all. If you repay resentment for father's sake, father's pure death will be defiled by the blood of hatred. Never kill anyone for the sake of resentment. Saying this, father passed away. I could not follow this lesson from my father, and just now I tried to kill you. Please kill me, and destroy my misguided heart filled with resentment.
He threw himself down before the king. Even the usually resolute King Banyo was awakened by hearing this. He deeply regretted his mistakes, took the prince's hand, and apologized sincerely.
Prince, I now sincerely apologize to you. My past is filled with nothing but cruel deeds that astound even myself. I could not recognize such an admirable saint and brutally burned him to death. The prince of the king I killed now holds the life of his enemy in his grasp, yet following his father's noble teachings, he does not kill. Through the divine actions of you and your father, I have been able to be reborn into a completely different world. Please forgive my sins.
The king placed both hands on the ground and, shedding tears of remorse, sincerely begged for forgiveness. Having revealed the truth to each other and forgiven one another, all their worries and resentments vanished in an instant. The agonizing night in the mountains passed, and the refreshing light of dawn shone into the grove. The two basked in the morning light on the grass, silently holding hands, forgetting the passage of time, and shedding tears of deep emotion. Eventually, the two came to their senses and exited the grove. Outside the grove, a large number of retainers were anxiously awaiting their return. They took some food there and finally regained their energy. The king pointed to Prince Chosho and asked the many retainers,
Does anyone know this person?
Among the retainers, there were many who had received favors from Prince Chosho in the past, but fearing that harm would come to the prince, they all replied that they did not know him. Then the king said,
This youth is none other than King Choju's prince, Chosho. From today, I will return to my original country of Varanasi and return the country of Kosala to Prince Chosho. And from now on, the two of us will become brothers and help each other.
The king revealed all the circumstances before everyone. Hearing this, there was no one who was not delighted. And there was also no one who was not moved by the great virtue of the deceased King Choju. Thus King Banyo returned to his home country, and Prince Chosho succeeded to the throne of the country of Kosala. It is said that these two countries, ever since this event, intimately associated like brothers for a long time. King Choju is the present Shakyamuni Buddha, and Prince Chosho is the present Ananda. King Banyo is the present Devadatta. Afterward. Based on the content of the story, I will explain the modern lessons. The first is breaking the chain of hatred and revenge. In the story, Prince Chosho has the opportunity to take revenge on King Banyo, his father's enemy, but in the end, he abandons revenge. This shows that hatred and revenge breed further hatred. In modern society as well, amid personal conflicts and social tensions, the story teaches the importance of breaking the chain of revenge and choosing dialogue and reconciliation. The second is the power of compassion and forgiveness. King Choju's compassionate actions ultimately changed the heart of his enemy, King Banyo. This story shows that forgiveness and compassion have the power to mend human relationships and bring about reconciliation. For modern people, there is a lesson that maintaining a compassionate heart, even amidst conflicts and friction, contributes to building better relationships and social peace. The third is individual growth and transformation. The story depicts Prince Chosho's inner conflicts and growth. He is driven by a desire for revenge, but in the end, he accepts his father's teachings and chooses a higher moral stance. This is an important lesson for modern people as well. We can grow through difficult situations and trials and have the opportunity to transform into a better self. The fourth is considering the consequences of actions. The story shows the importance of carefully considering the consequences of actions rather than being swayed by short-term emotions. Prince Chosho giving up revenge and considering the consequences of his actions with a broader perspective is an important lesson in modern society as well. This sutra, although an ancient story, provides universal lessons on personal conflict, tolerance, growth, and social harmony in modern society. On the other hand, the following can be considered as points to keep in mind based on the story's content. The first is the balance between ideals and reality. The story depicts high moral standards and acts of compassion as demonstrated by Prince Chosho and King Choju, but in actual life it may be difficult to fully apply these. In reality, while having a heart of compassion and forgiveness, it is also important to protect one's own safety and legitimate rights. It is necessary to make realistic judgments between ideal actions and actual situations. The second is the limit of self-sacrifice. In the story, Prince Chosho announces revenge and suppresses his own emotions, but in real life, excessive self-sacrifice can negatively impact health and happiness. Self-sacrifice is considered a virtue, but one's own emotions and needs are also important, and proper self-care is necessary. The third is the distinction between revenge and justice. While the story emphasizes avoiding revenge, in real life, proper handling of injustice and crime is necessary. It is important to pursue justice through legal and ethical means, not revenge. It is necessary to distinguish between emotional revenge and the pursuit of legal and ethical justice. In this way, the lessons learned from the story are valuable, but caution is required when appropriately applying them to diverse modern situations and cultural backgrounds.